Hello, everyone, and welcome to Efficient Growth, Zero-Touch IT Workflows, Automation for Busy Ops Teams, powered by Electric. My name is Megan Billingsley, and I'm excited to moderate this discussion for you today. In this session, you'll learn how to use a zero-touch strategy to streamline and automate manual processes, find out how SMBs can get started with implementation, how zero-touch boosts productivity, especially in regards to remote work, how to change your workflows, and what benefits to expect. We have an incredible lineup of speakers today, and throughout our discussion, if you have a question for our panel, just drop those in the chat section and we'll get to as many as we can during our time together. And with that, I'd love to introduce you to our speakers and have them each tell you a bit about their background. Andre, let's start with you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Preoteasa. I'm from Electric. I'm the Director of Internal IT, which means my job is to keep all the computers going for a large IT company. I've been doing this type of work for 17 years. I started out with physical servers. Now I'm in the cloud, which means I used to have nightmares about RAID card controllers dying. Now I have nightmares about Slack dying. I've been at Electric for about 6 or 7 months. Absolutely love it. And the best thing about it is working with really smart people accomplishing really big things.
Excellent. Thank you, Vijay.
Hey, I'm Vijay Brihmadesam. I'm the CEO at Kiinde and been here, I guess, almost 5 years. And we are here to try to make new parents' lives a little bit easier. So we're a consumer products company that sells on brick and mortar and online. And so we have a lot of ops, we have a lot of IT, and we have a lot of consumers. So would love to chat on all three fronts.
Great. Thank you. And last but not least, Nick.
Hey, everybody. Nick Amundsen. I'm the SVP of Strategy at Jamf. I have been at the company for about 15 years and currently lead our product team. And we're a partner of Electric. So really happy to be here today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all for being here. I'm excited to dive in. So we'll start with our first question. For those joining us who may be completely new to this topic, what is zero touch and how does it work? Andre?
So zero touch is a fancy term that a bunch of IT people created, which just means that we're not touching every single device. We're definitely touching some stuff with the goal of automating. So automating is the key word. You want to automate, and this leads to scale, which is, the big thing these days. On the user side, it's predictable. On the admin side, it's predictable. And it just works for, up to, endless numbers. Whereas before you were doing it manually, with humans. And we all know this because the original example of ZTP, of zero touch, is the old school telephone system. You take any telephone, you plug it into any telephone port, assuming it's on, and it works. You take that phone somewhere else and it works. And it just works. And the telephone system by AT&T was designed that way. Here in IT, everything was designed manually and bespoken. And now we're kind of working backwards to get everything to be automated and scalable.
Vijay, Nick, anything to add?
I think Andre's definition was incredible. I would say, I think the only other thoughts I have is remember now IT is not just device provisioning and things like that. It's beyond that. It's also touch points your customers have, right? It's and touch points that consumers within your own company or your employees have. So as you start thinking about all those touch points and how do you get those automated, it's a big task, and that's why there's large companies built around it.
Nick, anything?
The only thing I would add is that there's really no documentation required, in the definition of a zero touch experience. It should just be obvious, how you get started. And I think that's a big part of it as well. Yep.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. So what are some of the benefits of zero touch workflows? And Nick, we'll have you kick this one off.
Yeah, kind of continuing on that theme of no documentation required. I think we're all very familiar with the Apple unboxing experience where you take a device out of the box and you don't really need any instructions on how to proceed. There's a nice little assistant that pops up as you power on the device and it kind of steps you through what's required to get started. When you take that, try to apply that to an enterprise or commercial environment, there's more complexity. There are things like Wi-Fi networks and VPNs and user accounts that you have to configure. But really what we try to enable in partnership with Electric is an experience where all of that can still be just as consumer friendly. a better end user experience is something that results from this, and ultimately a better experience for your IT and operations teams as well, because they can then focus on what are the other things we can provide for our users, rather than trying to focus all their time on provisioning and all the issues that kind of come along with that. So to sum it up, better user experience, it's empowering to both the end user and to IT. It's more scalable. You can ship these devices directly to the users, and you don't have to have these things pile up in a warehouse somewhere. And then there's less human error typically associated with the setup process as well. Everything's going to be configured exactly the way that that user wants it to be on their device. So a much better experience than maybe traditional workflows have allowed us to have in the past.
And I think the other like big benefit, right? There's like the IT side of the benefit, and there's also like the employee benefit, right? It's like that person on the first day or second day or whatever, they're like provisioning all their IT stuff it's like frustrating, right? You're in a new job and now you're like trying to like struggle to get access to this account or that account, right? Versus if somebody had just spent like kind of the upfront time and thought about all those things, which is kind of what zero touch gets you to, is like, let me think about it. I'll think about it for the first employee. I'll make a few mistakes. I'll get to the second employee. I'll have fixed some of those. And by the time I get to like employee 7 or 8 or 200, it's just completely automated. All this thought has kind of gone into it. There's like a history, it builds, and it creates a better experience for your new employee, right? You don't want that employee starting the job thinking like, oh man, this is like a giant organization that I'm going to spend the rest of my life just trying to navigate how to get like access to Microsoft Word. And so I think it creates like happiness on both sides, and also creates less tension, I think, on the get-go between like IT teams and new employees, right? It's like a very well-known friction point that an employee starts and complains about IT. So it's better to get off on the right foot than one where both are actually like kind of at each other's throats from day one.
Yeah, Vijay and Nick hit it both on the head. It's great for the IT people. It's great for the user experience. It's predictable from a cost perspective, because scaling humans is difficult and expensive and cumbersome. Scaling technology is theoretically easy. And you need less humans for scale technology than you would for, scaling people. People are great though, don't get me wrong, but you put the people on on creating the automation rather than doing the manual work.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So what are some of the practical ways that ops teams specifically can save time with zero touch? And Vijay, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of like you step back, right? It's like, these are all people, right, in organizations, and like, what are the expectations that people sort of have, right? It's like, we used to go to stores, talk to sales reps, try to figure out, like a sales associate, try to figure out what aisle something was in, and then we moved to Amazon, right, where it's all zero touch from our perspective, right? We just kind of like type in what we want and we get it, right? And it's those same people who are coming to work every day, right? And it's like, I think the expectation now is that like things just work, right? And like, I think if you're not meeting that expectation for your employees or for your customers, you get into a lot of trouble. So now as an ops team, what do you need to do, right? It's like IT, you need to make sure like things provision well, that they work out of the box, right? Not creating frustration. As like an ops team that deals with your customers or your warehouses, if you're a consumer products company, we try to make that all the basics kind of work on a zero touch basis, because it's predictable. It like has very little human error. The warehouse gets used to getting things in a particular format. It's always in that format, and they become more efficient. They like us as a company. Our consumers like us more because like the stuff gets transported through our systems and gets back to them in a very predictable fashion, and one that's well thought out. It's not just happened to be, like, oh, so-and-so employee woke up on the wrong side of the bed and decided not to process stuff today, right? That type of stuff runs away. I think the other really big thing that ops teams need to focus on, a lot of times we build automations, we think about zero touch, and then we forget that we need KPIs to monitor that they're working. The beauty of it is it scales to, 1 million people. The downside of it is it also scales to 1 million people. So the errors will scale to 1 million people very quickly if you're not careful. So as you're building these things, I just always encourage people to build really good KPIs around them, right? It's like, and make sure you're getting feedback and that you're improving the process, right? And that's what humans are good at, right? So like humans are not generally the best at really repetitive tasks, but they are good at looking at KPIs and problem solving. And so it gets machines into what they're good at and humans into what they're good at. And it creates just like, I think, a happier universe at your company.
To add on to that, I think another thing that helps ops teams save time is, the unboxing experience is really kind of like the first impression. First impressions matter, but there are going to be things that have to be configured on that device over time. There are going to be patches that have to be installed and that kind of thing. And putting the user in charge of that process kind of sets the precedent that, over time, you're going to be maintaining this device on your own as well. We're, of course, going to give you some nudges over time to say, hey, this update has to be installed or this has to be configured. But it's really putting that user in the driver's seat so that they can do a lot of the operational work on their own. Again, saving the IT and ops team time and allowing them to focus on other ways to be able to provide value to the business.
Yeah, and additionally, it creates an asynchronous relationship between the ops team and the user, that they don't need to both be online at the same time, right? Everything's preloaded. Here you go, and you can, open your laptop, assuming you have internet. If we're talking about laptops, whenever you want, right? Everything is online running. You don't need to go 9 to 5, this and that. So it creates a lot of opportunities for ops teams to distance themselves from the real time kind of interaction they need. Maybe even going as far as reducing the customer service you have on that. If customers are doing this in off hours and this and that, you can tell the customer, hey, if you need help, come during this time. Otherwise, go for it. Do it on your own time, which creates a lot of opportunities left and right.
Perfect. Thank you. Just a reminder for our viewers today, if you have questions for our panel, feel free to use the comment section to send those in. I'd like to ask next, what role does zero touch play in today's remote and hybrid work environment? Nick, you want to kick this off?
Yeah, sure. So really in today's environment, I think zero touch is a necessity. Users are working anywhere, anytime, and without it, scheduling is really a challenge, right? Especially as you look at users in multiple time zones and just trying to coordinate onboarding. If you don't have a zero-touch workflow, it's really difficult to be able to coordinate that. Along with the many benefits that we've kind of talked about today, I think zero-touch really flips the traditional support model so that the user is only going to be calling IT when they run into a problem, as opposed to first step is call IT and we'll help walk you through the process, right? So again, it kind of adds on to all those themes we've talked about today, empowering the end user, setting that expectation that they're going to be maintaining, they're going to be configuring the device, we're going to assist them. But obviously, it's really up to them to continue to configure and maintain that device.
Yeah, I mean, I think in like a remote environment too, I mean, our experience with remote has been also this means people kind of work their own hours a little bit, like on the fringe. Like I don't know that as many people start at 9 and I don't know as many people finish at 5. And everyone has like how they kind of shift around their hours, right? I think is like the IT team would testify is like if stuff is in zero touch and you're trying to now provision someone's phone at like 8 p.m. at night and then waking up the next morning and trying to provision it at 6 a.m. before they start work, like your days just get impossible. And so I think in a remote, I mean, maybe we're the only people who have like creep on hours, or like people just working various time zones and so forth now. But I feel like that's pretty common, and I just don't know how you would deal with it without having something like this implemented, or just making sure like Andre is up at all hours of the day. But yeah, I think that it's pretty critical. I think as people go remote and people are now working across more time zones, that things just work because there's not going to be someone on all the time to like support them. Versus like in an office, it's like, oh, you walk down the hall and that person's there.
And this is the natural trend of technology. So if we step back a bit, this is the natural trend of technology outside of my original, telephone comment earlier, where it was designed from the get-go. All this like PC stuff, computer stuff from like the 70s, 80s and onwards were all designed, to do a very specific thing. And then, that scope just got bigger and bigger and bigger until, essentially you're walking around with a computer on you that can do everything. So you kind of expect everything to be automated. You expect everything to work. I once was told by somebody that Google ruined it for IT people because Google's fast, right? Google search. Whereas if you guys, I don't know if anybody remembers this, but before, like in the early 2000s, search took a while. You hit enter on like a corporate business search and, maybe a minute later it comes back. Now it's instant, right? And it's just this everything is founded on automate, scale, even when it sometimes doesn't matter. And whether you're remote, in-house, kind of both, kind of neither, whatever the case is, you just expect this stuff to kind of do it on its own, which creates a lot of headaches for people, but creates immense opportunities. And earlier, somebody talked about Amazon, how everything is zero touch. I mean, I don't want to say they invented this stuff because they certainly didn't, but all of us had that experience when we first started buying things from Amazon, where there was a tipping point where you went immediately to Amazon as opposed to not doing it, right? I remember I knew somebody who bought all the Christmas gifts on Amazon. And I was like, what are you, nuts? And then a couple of years later, of course, that's normal. You'd be nuts going into a store. Automate. There's so many things that are zero touch that you don't even think about, right? And you only know this stuff if you've been around for a while or you happen to be in the mix and seeing how this stuff progresses. So it's an endless opportunity as well as an endless headache. All sides are out.
And I think given kind of where like the economy is and like we all, read the news and we're going to move into turbulent times. It's like you kind of need that base layer of stuff to work. So people can think about like how to deal with the turbulent times ahead, right? So if like they're sitting there and like worrying about provisioning like Word to every user, and you're in a time where employees are scaling up or down, that's not really what you want them wasting their time on, right? You want them spending time on thinking about like, as we grow employees, what else do we need to scale in the org? What are the other infrastructure and IT needs that we need as we grow, and security needs and holes that we have, right? Not can Vijay use Microsoft Word today?
Perfect. Thank you. For teams that are new to zero touch, how can they get started? Andre?
So the big thing is try to understand what it's going to look like when it's all said and done, the so-called vision statement. What does it look like? Don't worry about how you get there. What does it look like? What does it look like from the user? What does it look like from the company? What does it look like from the person signing the check? What does it look like from every single angle? Because it's a new experience, period. It's a new experience. And then work backwards, develop a good strategy, approach it differently than manual. A lot of, IT companies will say, okay, you get a laptop, we'll mail it to our office, John over here or whoever will configure it and you'll get it in a couple of weeks and we'll mail it over to you and it'll be perfect. Whereas with zero touch, specifically zero touch provisioning, ZTP, all that stuff is done ahead of time. So it just gets mailed to you, right? And you have to think about all the different things involved, including things IT people don't think about, like money and the cost and people and bottlenecks, things that are outside the technical realm. So, approaching this it's a different mindset. And if you've never been in a situation where you automated something or scaled, and in this scope, it's the same thing. It's a very different. And what you realize is that you focus on the technology, you make sure the technology is all taken care of, as opposed to focusing on the people, where you focus on, we're going to have, John, but let's get John, Mary, and a couple other people to do this stuff. And that's really the big change, is focus on a vision statement and think of it differently.
Andre, as you talk about some of the, as a CEO, I feel like I should ask about costs. And I think what's the right scale where you would start to think about this for a company in terms of like devices or employee count? What's the right metric to start thinking about it? What do you think about what additional, what percentage cost are you adding to IT, or even in dollar terms? How do you start thinking about all of that?
That's a great question. The way I think of it is, if you're just doing a few things at once, let's say we're talking about provisioning laptops, right? Mm-hmm. It's better to have, if you're just doing a few laptops a month, it's better just to have somebody do it, right? Because there's a lot of investment in automating it. There's the technology, there's the skill set for the person or persons, there's the redundancy required in case so-and-so is not there. How do we keep this going? As Nick will talk about, Jamf's a big player in this. Jamf has updates, and Jamf, is something that people have to bring in and experiment with and all this. So it doesn't really, it's actually costs more money to automate from the get-go, right? Mm-hmm. And all of us that have been in IT for a while have learned this back when we used to, ghost disks or all the silly things we used to do with the laptops 15, 20 years ago. There comes a tipping point where you say, I need to invest in automating because, I can reduce headcount, or I can be more better customer service, or just more predictable, or be able to absorb influx of various requests. And that's really the tipping point. And a lot of folks, to be totally honest, they're nervous about this. They're scared about this. It's a different mindset. I think Nick said it best is, or maybe Vijay said it, is when you automate, you also automate errors, right? And that's something you got to be conscious of. So to give you like a round number, it really comes down to where you're starting to think, do I hire more people to do the manual process, or do I hire more people to automate the manual process? And then immediately you say, okay, well, in a year from now, when this is done, I'm not going to need to hire more people to do the manual process, but I may need to hire 1 or 2 more people for the automated process. And that's scale.
Yeah. How does Electric help you get this done?
Well, Jamf's a big player, and we're very grateful for Jamf. So without giving away too many secrets, we use Jamf, and from our perspective, this is a fantastic vendor. It's large, I believe. They have a cloud service. We're able to use them as a service and partner with them to make all this happen. And in many ways, they carry the heavy lifting. I mean, it would be insane if we created our own tools for that, right? So good partners and good customer support and good industry love. People love Jamf. That's how we get it done. There's just also a lot of human planning, talking to people, getting people on the same page. Automation sounds awesome until you get into it and you start realizing, oh, this has to change and that has to change, and because once you automate, you don't turn back, right? And in an ideal world, everything has an API and all the APIs talk together, and then you just sit back and kind of watch all the magic. That's not there yet.
Nick, anything that you want to bring to this discussion about getting started? I mean, since Jamf is being highlighted quite nicely here, would love to hear from your perspective. I look at us as
kind of like the glue that pulls a lot of this together, but ultimately, it's a lot of partners we work with to make this reality as well, right? So Apple's a strong partner. They've been really making some enhancements over the last several years to try to make these frameworks so that you can have a great user experience in a commercial environment. So a lot of it's due to them. I also see a lot of evolution with the identity providers out there, right? So kind of like Apple and the identity providers working together on this mission to eliminate passcodes and to use single sign-on as much as possible. All of that is what's required to make a great user experience and to ultimately make IT's job easier, right? That's, again, what we're trying to get back to is having IT focus on how they can provide the most business value and make sure that the business is running as efficiently as possible. So we do a lot of the heavy lifting, but it's the partnerships and the APIs and frameworks that we use from all those partners that ultimately brings it all together as well.
What do you guys use for like deprovisioning? I think we always think about provisioning, but like in terms of deprovisioning and making sure like when someone gets removed from all the systems, like honestly on the deprovisioning side, we do a lot of spreadsheets, which is really painful. How would you improve that process?
That's a great question as well. And I think it goes back to like hooking into all the systems that are used by that user in their journey at the company to be able to ensure that they know that that user is becoming deprovisioned and then either archiving, the data as needed or removing that device and that user from the system as needed. But it's a great point. I think once we get past the initial onboarding, then like I was kind of alluding to earlier, there's all the ongoing maintenance of that device and then the employee journey moving on to another company. And how do you really kind of cover all of those tracks, especially to have a great security model? You have to do things like go in and revoke certificates and data that would have been not only on that device, but in the systems that were accessed by that device as well. So it's a great point. I think there's a lot to be done there still, but it's all possible.
Yeah. Deprovisioning is hot stuff, not just at Electric, but in a lot of places there's services that do that. It's, again, we talk about this as if it's a problem because we expect it to be automated. Not that long ago, deprovisioning was, maybe even going with a clipboard and being like, what was done, or a spreadsheet, right? And that was like, oh wow, you're using a spreadsheet. That's so smart. Now we just one click, get it done, and we're almost there. The irony of all this is modern IT is endless apps. The way IT was done 15 years ago is almost opposite to now from the IT director point of view, where we had servers and our own stuff and intranets and SharePoint and all this stuff. And now it's all cloud-based, and there's very few VPNs, and you could access this from your phone in any country and la-da-da. So we all expect things to just happen instantly, but they never did. And, this is the push that we need as IT people to do this, because then it relieves us of that issue. And then there's another issue, right? And going back to how Google ruined it is people just expect things to happen quickly. So do I. Right. When I log into a Jamf server, I expect it to come up quickly, and it does. Right. I don't expect to sit there and see it like tick, 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 getting things ready, even though I know things are getting ready. Right. So it's that fun play on things to, just push things to getting better, better, faster, faster, better, better. It's almost like a Moore's law of expectations. Every year, people expect things to be twice as fast.
Yeah, the only solution I found is like we try to enforce single sign-on as much as possible, right? So that way we can deprovision your email, and then you lose access across everything. But that's really, really hard to do in the world of like thousands of apps.
Yeah, and this is where you go outside of IT and it becomes a cultural thing, right? Like people expect one username, one password, but then they have to, navigate all the single sign-on funny business from various apps and even the way that the terminology comes across, right?
Yeah. Great.
Perfect. We have maybe just about 1 minute left, so I do just want to point out this real quick. We do have one question about entitlement stores. Any comments from our panelists on entitlement stores? That's just what it says is entitlement stores. So
yeah, if you could provide any more detail, if I make an assumption that it's about kind of like the keychain on an Apple device, or where things are being stored on the device, then I think it's really important in the deprovisioning process to make sure that all that gets wiped and removed and possibly archived somewhere, so that if we have to go back into some systems and access that user's data, that somebody at the organization is able to do that. But yeah, it's a really important concept these days, as we've got various different ways to identify a user and authorize a user on systems, to secure that and make sure that in the employee journey, there's a way to be able to access it when they move on.
Perfect. Thank you. With that, we are all out of time for today. But as we wrap up, I do want to thank each of you, each of our speakers, Andre, Vijay, and Nick, for your time and expertise today, as well as you, our audience, for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your day.